Hello, and welcome to God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm educator and headstrong eldest child, Giles Goff.
And I'm quirky yet overlooked middle child, Julia Hall.
Today, for this very special Christmas episode, we're going to be looking at Little Women, Greta Gerwig's 2019 adaptation of the classic American novel by Louisa May Alcott in 1868. So, Julia, I just need to gauge this. What is your relationship to Little Women?
The film is like my first ever foray into this at all.
Oh, right, okay.
So I knew of the book, I knew it existed, but I'd never read it. I hadn't watched any of the previous films. It was until you went, hey, you need to watch this. And I went, okay, cool. And I absorbed it into my brain. So this is kind of clean slate, first ever fresh viewing of Little Women.
That is fantastic, because for the next hour or so of this episode, I am going to be fangirling so damn hard. There are moments when you can sort of look in on yourself and notice just how you're passionate about such diverse things. I can talk for hours about Star Trek, X-Men, Christianity, why Wales is great, and Little Women. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just that's such a wide range of
very
things.
Noble things to be passionate about. Wales is great.
So first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Is Little Women actually a Christmas film? So I had to have a think about this, because it's obviously sort of set out over a period of years, and bits of the story happen at different times in the year. However, Love Actually happens over the period of a year, and there's a spring and summer and autumn in there.
Yeah.
And that's a Christmas film, so I think that's fair enough. I think thematically it fits in with much more of the sort of Christmas things than Die Hard.
I mean the very because we do have a copy of the book in the library, so I have sort of skimmed bits of it over the past couple of days, and the very first scene is the Christmas scene, where they give their Christmas breakfast to the Hummels, I believe, and then. In return, Mr. Lawrence gives them a Christmas breakfast, which I think is very much the Christmas spirit.
100%.
And it was released on Christmas Day.
Oh, was it? I didn't even know that.
Yes,
Fantastic.
So it was released on Christmas Day, exactly 25 years after the 1994 one. My maths might be off, but it was released the same day as the 1994 one, just
I see,
in the future. I learned recently.
If you're unsure, I asked Twitter this. I said, important question, is Little Women a Christmas movie? Quietly hoping Jordan King and Geek Queen Helen O'Hara might weigh in on this. And I said, I'm thinking about the Christmas special of my podcast. I just love Alcott. I visited her house, and I'd quite like an excuse to talk about her. And Helen O'Hara, of Empire Magazine and Empire Podcast, writer of Women versus Hollywood, and creator of the Bar Humbug podcast, which is all about Christmas movies. She said, that house is so good. The Owls, best piano. And yes, I think it qualifies. So you can argue with me if you want, but you've got to argue with Helen O'Hara as well, you know?
You can't argue with that. That's the expert right there.
It is what it is, you know? So, yes, I did actually visit the house that she
That's amazing.
Wrote the book in and set it in. Basically, it was 2005. We just finished Camp America. I was staying with a friend in Boston, and that friend accompanied me up to, Concord, Massachusetts, just so I could go and visit this one little boxy brown house, you know?
That's awesome.
You know how, when you go to Cardiff and it's like you're walking through the set of Doctor Who?
Yeah.
This is exactly like you're walking through the set of Little Women, because the house is just so intrinsically linked in with the story, because it's so autobiographical, and every film version I've seen has sort of tried to stay pretty close to that orchard house.
Piece of history right there.
Now it's time for Julia's Facts.
Yeah. We all know that, obviously, as you've already mentioned, Little Women, the book, was published in 1868. But did you know that there are books that follow Little Women?
Who do you think you're talking to?
I know you know, but do
to?
the royal you, our dear listeners, do they know? So it was followed by a second part, which was called Good Wives in 1869, then followed by Little Men, which follows the students of the boys' school that Jo sets up with her husband Friedrich in 1871. And then the last one, spoiler alert, they get married. And then the last one is Jo's Boys and How They Turned Out, which was published in 1886.
Yeah, can you imagine that as a fan? Boom, Little Women in 1868, which... No, but the problem is Little Women and Good Wives kind of get smooshed together a lot. Like
from what I was reading, I think a lot of it sort of ends up in the film as well. The stuff that happens in Good Wives. So
100%. So the way the book ends is basically their father comes home for Christmas. Beth does not die
and Tiny Tim did not die.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, Beth's real sick, you know? Literally, my first introduction to Little Women is, do you remember the episode of Friends where Rachel and Joey swap books?
Yes.
Rachel's book is Little Women and Joey's book is The Shining. He spoils something for her, so Rachel goes, Beth dies. You know? No, don't. She doesn't die, does she? No, okay, all right. Beth doesn't. And then just Joey ends coming in saying, Beth's real sick, you know? So when I've got that in the back of my head, when you read Little Women and thank goodness Beth survives till the end of the book, you're like, okay, all right, fine, wicked, brilliant, fine, great. And then you get Good Wives and, oh, check it out, Beth dies.
She's dead. Yeah, I didn't know that previously. I'm not sure where. I think it's one of those things where you sort of pick it up. That Beth would pass away. So I was prepared for that. It still hurt, but I was prepared.
So for context, my mum had like all 4 editions of the books. I picked it up, opened the book, and it was like, oh, there's Jo. She's 15. I'm 15. This is the character I'm going to relate to far too much. You know, that was literally the thought process, you know. And I think anybody who sees himself as a writer in any way, shape or form always relates to Jo. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But apparently Little Women, speaking of writers, apparently it only took Louisa May Alcott 10 weeks to write it. Although apparently this could have been for one of 2 reasons. One being she was so consumed in the process that, you know, she didn't eat, she didn't sleep. Her whole, you know, life for those 10 weeks was Little Women. Or she hated writing it and just wanted to get it done. Because much like Jo, and I know a lot of Little Women is based on Louisa May Alcott's own personal experiences in her personal life. She also started out writing sort of like pulp fiction in popularist kind of fiction.
I love the kind of mercenary aspect to it. It's like, okay, are you going to pay me? I'll write whatever you want then.
Yeah.
You know?
But that sort of penny dreadful kind of idea. So some accounts that I've read sort of indicate that actually she wasn't super jazzed about writing Little Women, which I hope is not the case, because I think that's quite sad. If sort of I think the thing that you're most famous for is something that actually you didn't particularly like. It's a bit of a Conan Doyle situation. So hopefully it is because, you know, it consumed her life so much that she was just obsessed with getting this book finished. It's
always difficult to like switch genres, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? J.K. Rowling was so self-conscious about it that she literally came up with a pseudonym, so that she could write about something else. So I think it always feels like a crunching of gears. And if you've been doing like pulpy stuff with like bodice ripping, like sword fighting stuff, and then you're like, so me and my sisters overcame our issues, you know, you must be feeling about like.
I mean, the novel burning on Amy's part is pretty hardcore. I think that hurt me. Like, and there's no backups back then. You're not backing any of that up. That's the whole thing. Yeah, I did like the non sort of the almost flashback kind of element. I think if the costuming had been a little, and I know it won an Oscar, don't come for me. If the costuming had been a bit more on point, I think that could have really helped tell the story a lot better.
Talk me through that.
So during the 1860s, when this is set, you've got sometimes they're wearing stuff that's quite 1860s. Sometimes they're really not. The 1860s, if you're looking at it side on, is all about these massive crinoline skirts. So you get, rather than a round shape, you're getting more of an elliptical kind of shape.
Okay.
But these round sleeves are very popular. Kind of round shoulders, sort of lots of braids. It's a very round, almost kind of childish silhouette in a way. Okay. And then when you move to the sort of early 1870s, then you're coming to the first bustle period. So you're getting sort of taller updos. There's very much more of a style for kind of a slender, except when you get to the bustle, which kind of the 70s really pushes that bustle out. But from front on, it's a very slender, narrow sleeve kind of physique, a more grown-up physique, if you will, which I think would contrast nicely with this is when we're children and this is when we're adults. Just to sort of, and again, I'm also... I need spoon feeding to me a little bit. So it's sometimes I was like, is this before or after the thing with the other thing? But I feel, I don't know, I think if it had just been there, I think that would have been a really nice kind of indicator of these two very... quite different points in
I think they did well in some aspects in that you could delineate where it was in the timeline based on what Joe's hair is like, you know, at certain points and things like that, and some just little bits about like the color grading. But it did occur to me that it could be a little bit, well, actually it didn't. Somebody had to point out to me that it could be a bit confusing for someone coming into it cold. But for me, by the time it came out, Little Women had been in my life for like 21 years already. So I'm like, screw you guys, we're here for the hardcore, you know?
Yeah, get with it or go home, get with the programme or get off the bus, you know? Apparently, so to get talking about the film now, so Saoirse Ronan, first of all, pretty much cast herself in the film. Apparently she reached out to Greta Gerwig and sort of went, oh, I'll be playing Joe. And initially Greta was quite reluctant because I think they'd just finished Lady Bird, but then decided actually that's quite a Joe thing for Saoirse to have done, and so was like, yeah, well, she's clearly perfect, which I think is delightful. Just by the way,
I like the idea
that doing a film
because she knew her, it could basically be like, Bagsy me, Joe. Yeah, but we have to have an audition. Yeah, but no, I Bagsied it though. But we have to be fair and honest and make sure we... Yeah, but if they really cared about it, they would have Bagsied it first, wouldn't they? You know?
Exactly. And Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh apparently used to wrestle each other on set before their scenes to kind of get that physical anger between them right for each kind of, like... scene.
Yeah, they're
So a thought there.
There might.
Speaking of mine, Giles, what's your thoughts on those?
I'm sure it was entirely respectful and respectable, and I'm conscious this is a family show and a Christmas show, so I'm just going to say nothing at this point.
Yeah, no, just a friendly little, little headlock here and there.
Just two girls being dudes, just wrestling like you do.
Yeah, to be fair, like you do.
There probably wasn't even any mud bath there. I don't know what anyone's going on about. What do you mean, Jelly? What? Huh?
Yep. But yes, apparently to kind of get that, because I think there is quite a lot of tension between Joe and Amy in the film, especially. Amy at one point, I think, mentioning that she sort of hates being in Joe's shadow, sort of being her second to Laurie when he decides he's going to marry her instead. Yeah,
it's very complicated and very honest, that the fact that emotions can be messy, that relationships can be messy, I can't remember off the top of my head whether the bit about, when Joe is like, okay, no, you're right, I probably should marry Laurie, and she puts the thing she puts the letter in the little postbox. I can't remember whether that is an addition of the film, or whether that's true to the book, but it is a bit like, it's quite heartrending, that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a real gut punch when then she comes down the stairs and that's before then. It's because Laurie's like, oh, by the way, we're married. Just, I'm not gonna lie, I hate Laurie. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it.
Okay, all right. All right, talk me through your thought process then.
I despise him with every iota of my being. Which at least how he is portrayed in this film, because
Shots fired.
He is the word I want to say rhymes with truck, but I'll use playboy instead.
Okay.
Because he is the absolute epitome of an 19th century playboy. He's chatting up Joe, and then he's rude. He's negging Meg at the ball.
Yeah.
On one hand, being, oh well, I don't like that you're being frivolous and actually caring about wanting to participate in society. How dare you? And then he's like, oh, but dance with me. Make up your mind, babes. Which one is it? Which one is it? And although, because I talked this through with my mum on the phone yesterday, because I just had to vent. Apparently in the book, Fred Vaughn, who is in the film is Amy's possibly engaged to be, doesn't actually exist in the book.
Right, okay.
At least that's what my mother has reliably informed me. That could be wrong. And in a way, I think that, again, paints Laurie in a worse light, because this millionaire, or this very rich man that Amy would have married, which, in my view, would have absolutely given her the means to do what she loved, which was painting. That was especially in this, and again, what's discussed quite often in this film is a woman's prospects and marriage as an economic proposition, I think, in Amy's words, which is a very real reality, for lack of a better word, for a lot of women. To marry well, sometimes your life depended on it. And so then for Laurie to swan in and go, oh, Amy, don't marry him. My guy. My guy.
Yeah, but this is what you're not getting, right? This is what makes these characters real, and makes them. It's not just that they're flawed, because everybody's flawed, whatever. But it's the fact that Amy should be like, no, you had your chance, haha. It's that awkwardness of I've been so obsessed with your sister, and now I see you in a completely different light, and I've got no right to ask this. Are you familiar with the concept of the hot window?
I can guess at the hot window.
I think I came up with the term, but I don't think I came up with the concept. We see it all over in so much stuff, where you see the sort of slightly dowdy, homely looking girl gets a makeover. You're like this, the librarian takes off her glasses, unbuttons her hair, and all of a sudden she's absolutely stunningly beautiful, So just the hot window is just that thing of where somebody who wasn't attractive to you anymore before is suddenly really attractive to you. The way I prefaced it is that the window will close at some time, but you can just see that bit where he's like, okay, and now full disclosure, the way he talks to Meg at the party is horrendous. But what's interesting is if you try and juxtapose that with I think the 1994 version, and again, we're going back decades since I saw that one, the girls are even more horrible, they're even more superficial, and Meg is really bending over backwards to fit in with these people. So again, it kind of comes down to how they're depicted, because there are other ways of shooting that scene where Laurie seems like the good guy. He's not playing the game. He's like, I want you to be your authentic self. But you're right, it does come across as negging, and then he realizes, I've really screwed myself over. Please come and dance with me. I just want to make this better. This is one of the things I do love about Laurie, is he's so he's incredibly flawed, but he's flawed like a teenage boy is flawed. Having spent some time as a teenage boy myself, I can really relate to those kind of just gear crunchingly bad awkward moments, I
think at least I think for Laurie, he has a want to change.
Yeah.
I think the way that he's portrayed in the 2019 film is perhaps maybe they've done him a bit dirty in exaggerating, I think, some of those kind of playboy flaws of his. But I just didn't like him.
Okay,
I didn't like it. Just no shade to Timothée Chalamet. He did an excellent job as a character, and in that it's, you know, he's a flawed character, and that's fine. I just don't like him. I can't. The red flags is flagging.
Okay, all right. Do me a favour. Watch the 1994 version with Christian Bale playing Laurie, and tell me.
Christian Bale is Laurie in the 94.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay,
Batman
I'm
is Laurie. Watch it in that and see if your feeling is the same. And it'd be fascinating to see how you think.
I do want to read the book now as well to get a full rounded experience.
Off topic. I'm sure you must have like another fact for me.
I do have one last fact, or a sort of a couple really, that can kind of be squidged into one. But back on the costuming kind of side, the artist whose name escapes me, but I will refer to my notes here, Winslow Horn. I think I've got that right. But his art was very influential for Greta Gerwig and the costume designer. I think some pieces, including Jo's hat that she wears in the beach scene, are like basically reproductions from those paintings. Yeah. And each sister also had their own colour palette, which they kind of stick through the film. So if you...
Jo is red?
Yeah.
Is Meg blue?
She isn't blue, but blue is one of the other sisters.
Would Amy be blue?
Amy's blue.
Right, okay. Is Beth green?
No, but one of the other sisters is.
So Meg is green.
Meg is green.
Right, okay. I have no idea what Beth is then.
So Meg is supposed to be lavender and green. Jo is red and indigo. Beth is brown and pink, and then Amy is blue. Which is subtle enough, I think, that you don't immediately go, oh, Beth is clearly pink. But I think when I read that, I kind of thought back and went, oh yeah, actually that does make sense. I think in the earlier scenes when they're children, they tend to wear their colours more, or at least more of them, and then when they kind of grow up, so I think Jo has that sort of red scarf that she wears, the little kind of neckerchief sort of scarf, so the older they get, the less sort of pronounced the colour palettes are. But Marmee has all of those colours, and it's why she's in quite a lot of paisley prints and other sort of
that's fascinating,
multicoloured kind of fabric to represent all of her girls, basically all of her little women, which I think is quite nice.
I wasn't aware of that, but I love that. That's fantastic.
But that's me. I'm facted out.
Fantastic.
I have told you all I know.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that. Now we have a wonderful guest for this one. I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Cooke. I am an author of erotic historical fiction, mostly working and dabbling in the Victorian era. I am also a Victorian era enthusiast and a film marketer.
Fantastic. Sarah, it's such a joy to have you on the podcast today.
I'm thrilled to be here talking about one of my favourite things.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get into it. What can you tell us about Little Women?
Oh, well, Little Women is, I think, the best historical feminist literature for young women and young girls that was based on it's a book by Louisa May Alcott, published in 1868, and it has been adapted to the film 7 different times over the course of like 100 plus years, and most recently the 2019 version by the wonderful, immutable Greta Gerwig. And it revolves around 4 March sisters as they transform from young girls to young women.
You summed that up beautifully there. So let's talk about a lot of people growing up. Elder millennials like myself will probably be more used to like the 1990s version of Little Women with Winona Ryder as Jo. So what is it about Greta Gerwig's version? How did that come about?
Well, Greta Gerwig, like most women, and especially like most young women, has always been inspired by Little Women. And she's apparently the story goes that one day she was moving house and she was looking at her books and she found Little Women again and she was reading through it and forgot how great it was. And also she said that it just as a writer herself, the story of Jo was something that kind of inspired her and she wanted to redo that and make it a new version for this new generation.
That brings me to my next point. This new version of Little Women, it's the same but different. It's sort of, how would you say it? What would you say are some of the main differences in this version?
My biggest one is the how they treat Amy, I think, is always a different aspect. A lot of people see Amy as sort of naive and foolish and quite villainous at times. I mean, as a writer, burning someone's manuscript is probably like the most heinous act you could commit against them.
Do you know what? I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's, for me, the biggest difference is the fact that she tells the entire story non-chronologically. We have it's like jumping back and forth in time. And if you see it chronologically and you see Kirsten Dunst's Amy burn the manuscript, you're like, okay, well, screw her then. She can get absolutely stuffed. And it doesn't help that in that version, the adult Amy, from what I remember, was a bit cold and unfeeling. You know, you couldn't really, she was very difficult to empathise with.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's something about Florence Pugh and the writing here that really even the act itself, you can understand that it just comes from a bit of petulance and jealousy, and you can sort of see how Amy's life has been impacted by Jo's life, you know, like how she's always like in the shadow of Jo, and Jo's getting the things that Jo doesn't necessarily want, but Amy wants. And you can kind of see where that kind of festers a little bit more in Greta Gerwig's with that kind of jumping chronological. And also Florence Pugh has this wonderful way of just eliciting empathy in a character that necessarily doesn't have it in previous adaptations.
Yeah.
And then you have this wonderful monologue that Amy has in her adult sequences with Laurie, where you can sort of see that for women, it's necessary to marry and to marry well, because being an artist isn't necessarily like a feasible act. And that's kind of where a lot of Amy's like how she's been raised and how she is like pushed, and you can sort of see why she would think that way. And then you can sort of somewhat understand the manuscript. And then you also get the sequence where you can see that she's actually apologetic and she can understand what she's done wrong, and she's trying so hard to sort of like work her way back. And it's never quite the same with Jo and Amy. And I think that's really beautifully done as well, that you can sort of explore that even as adults, there's still tension between them, and there always will be.
Yeah, I rewatched Gerwig's version recently, and the line where Amy says to Laurie, don't do that to me when I have loved you my whole life. And you get a real sort of insight into Amy's internal life there, which we never see anywhere else, because the book, and from what I remember, the 90s version is so resolutely Jo's film and Jo's story that nobody else really gets a look in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of bit where she's like, I can't be second best. Like, I can't be a replacement is basically what Amy's like. And it must, obviously, she knows that Laurie was in love with Jo, and Jo thwarted his advances and his marriage proposal. And then Laurie's now paying attention to Amy. And for Amy, that's heartbreaking, because she's never going to, in her mind, especially at this moment, she'll never be number one. She'll always be second best, and that's how she's felt all of her life. She's felt second best to Jo. Yeah,
no, that's absolutely fascinating. And I think it felt to me like this version was more pragmatic. Like I say, the 90s version is very much about follow your art and follow your dreams and all this sort of stuff, whereas this version was like, no, we do actually need to eat. So you do need to support your family. So marrying rich is just something you're going to have to get used to.
Exactly. And I also think that this version does a lot with Meg's storyline a lot better than any other adaptation, whereas Jo's very scornful of the fact that Meg wants to settle down and be married and have kids. And whereas Jo, and I understand Jo on a deep level, where she's like, we shouldn't be settling down. Women are made to be more than this. You should be a great actress. And Meg was like, this is my dream. Like, why are you taking that from me?
Yeah.
Like, it may not be as glamorous as how you want my life to live, but I'm happy and I want to marry and have kids and live that life. I feel like it's so beautifully woven in this story that women can have they can have it, or they can have love and like a relationship and a career, but they can also have like marriage and be happy being a homemaker and be at home, and all that kind of different threads, which is why I find Greta Gerwig's version so beautifully captured.
100%. Listen, Sarah, thank you so much for finally coming on the podcast. It's a real joy to have you on.
Thank you so much. I absolutely could. I do have to say before I go that there is a 1930s version, a 1933 version by George Cukor, which I think everyone should watch. It's not the best version of it, but it does have Katharine Hepburn.
I was going to say that's the Katharine Hepburn version.
Katharine Hepburn. And if some people are like, "Oh, I can't believe Saoirse Ronan as like a young girl," the time flip from Greta Gerwig's version. I'm like, you should see Katharine Hepburn trying to be like a 12-year-old girl, because it is just it's brilliant, and like it's beautifully done for the time. And I will always cry when Beth dies in every single version of Little Women.
Yeah,
but if you want to see like ridiculous aging down,
that's what threw me the most actually was in this one how Florence Pugh could just be a 12-year-old 1 minute and like 21 in the other. Like, how is there some kind of CGI going on here?
There is one bit in 12-year-old young Amy that Florence Pugh has this line delivery, and I'm like, that is a 12-year-old girl. And it's when she sees Laurie for the first time, she goes, hi. She goes, hi, I'm Amy, trying to be older. And I'm like, that makes her so much younger.
Yeah, I know, man. Florence Pugh's got some serious game. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Let's leave it there.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Oh, do you have anything you'd like to plug, by the way?
Oh, yes. I would love to plug my book, Diary of Murders, which is a dark Victorian erotic murder mystery set in 1895.
You know those Christians, they love their dark erotic mysteries, you know?
It's got a very spicy Christmas scene. I mean, perfect for the holidays.
Fantastic. Okay, Julia, that was Sarah Cooke. What do you think?
I'm still on the erotic murder mystery set. That's on my Christmas list immediately. I need multiple copies just to stash around the house. You know, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, 100%. Now it's time for Finding the Faith in the Film. One of the trickiest things about finding faith parallels in Little Women is that it's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. On the one level, you could just divorce it completely from any kind of religious or faith-based themes and just focus on the feminist struggles of the young women in the 1860s. On the other hand, I see critics who get like really mad at this adaptation because it hasn't talked about the religious parallels as much as they would have liked. And I think part of the problem of this is that large sections of the book are so heavily didactic. They are so much trying to teach you a moral lesson, which might have been entirely appropriate in like the Victorian era, but that kind of style of storytelling really sort of struggles to survive in the kind of modern world. You know, one of the things I found particularly about this film and this story is that rather than having like explicit faith parallels, I felt a lot of the time it kind of reflects what it's like to be a Christian, and a lot of the kind of issues that you deal with kind of come through in this, and that whilst the modern world might have moved on in a lot of ways, there's large swathes of kind of Christianity which are still struggling with some kind of the more patriarchal stuff. Are you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
But I want to get into the weeds on this and try and look at one of the things that really kind of complicates finding the Christian parallels in Little Women, and that is Louisa May Alcott's belief in transcendentalism. Are you familiar with that at all?
I am not. You'll have to educate me, but that sounds fascinating.
Okay, so transcendentalism is a philosophical, spiritual, and literary movement that developed in the late 1820s and 1830s in like the New England area of the United States. And a core belief is inherent goodness of people and nature. And while society and its institutions have corrupted the purity of the individual, people are their best when truly self-reliant and independent. Okay. So a little bit of background for you. Louisa May Alcott's father was Bronson Alcott, and he is an education reformer and like a free thinker, And he's so revolutionary that he's really bad at keeping a job. He keeps setting up schools and everyone's like, yeah, this is great. This is fantastic. And then we're like, okay, we're going to teach the kids how to debate and do critical thinking. And then the parents are like, whoa, we don't like, no,
we don't do that here.
We don't want the kids to do that. So he would also overspend way too much, and then they would have to sort of close the school, sometimes like moving house to try and escape their debtors. To give you an idea, the family moved 20 times in 30 years.
Oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting.
Absolutely, 100%. I think part of the reason maybe why she loves Orchard House so much is it's finally just this sense of feeling settled, like. So to give you an idea, these transcendentalists, they're like one of those kind of unique American religious or philosophical movements. So like, over here we have we have effectively a state religion of like Protestantism,
thanks,
Anglicanism.
Henry.
Thanks, that's came in handy. And because the Americans don't have that, it's kind of a bit of a free-for-all, effectively. Yeah. That's why we get, like, Mormonism, Adventism, Methodism, all this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
So, to give you an idea, some of the transcendentalist pioneers are, like, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and they're great friends of the Alcotts.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, Bronson Alcott's beliefs about transcendentalism seem to, like, radicalize him a little bit. They live in a commune at some points, and he starts to believe things like you shouldn't be paid for anything you do and only survive on what you can make yourself, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, really makes just living difficult.
Yeah, it's giving like zero waste crunchy mom of the 2023s who doesn't use GMOs.
Yeah, those people who are just exhausting, So Bronson becomes a bit of a waste of space as a result. So Louisa kind of sees it as her job to support the family through her writing work, which is why you get so heavily this sense of I'll make some money by writing some words and selling it, And I quite like it that when it comes to fictionalizing her family life, she just writes her dad out of the picture by respectively portraying him as a clergyman who goes off to be a chaplain in the Union Army during the Civil War. It's like, oh, and Dad's away. He's far, far away doing something flipping useful rather than just sitting around navel gazing. Do you know what I mean? So there are references to transcendentalism as well as Christianity in the novel, which don't 100% sit well with each other. And there's a part of me that's like tempted to wonder whether Alcott put in the references to Christianity either because it was like just all around her. It's synonymous with being a good person. It's like Natalie described it last lesson about being a cultural Christian,
Yeah.
Or perhaps Louisa was like, hey, do you know what? I'll stick in some God stuff and it'll definitely sell the book better, There's a twisted part of me that kind of respects that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I need to make some money. I'm going to write this book. It'll sell better if I have more of this. And that's, do you know what? If your dad is just checked out in terms of earning a living, then fair enough,
Yeah.
So the March sisters kind of live out their faith without really ever like explaining it or evangelizing it. And in a world where you would be assumed to be a Christian, I can see why you wouldn't need that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would be the more feminist aspects back then that would have been more like revolutionary than the faith stuff. And now, like 160 odd years later, it's now kind of the other way round. Like, of course, we believe that a woman should make a living through her own works and this sort of stuff. And now it's the I shall make myself a better Christian. That's the stuff that doesn't quite sit right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is that in the book, they're less inspired by the Bible itself and more inspired by one of the greatest works of Bible fan fiction, The Pilgrim's Progress. Have you ever heard of that one?
I have not. This is
oh, dude.
Bible fan fiction is not a phrase I thought I would hear nor myself repeat.
No, but you've heard of like Paradise Lost, so there's.
Oh, I suppose. And I mean, Dante's Inferno is like
Dante's Inferno is self-insert,
yeah.
And then I went to heaven, and everybody thought I was ace. This sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a mood. We've been there. Who hasn't been there?
Exactly. So, okay, maybe strictly speaking, Pilgrim's Progress isn't necessarily fanfic because it's... do you know who else I learned? Anne freaking Rice, Vampire Queen herself, wrote Christian fan fiction. She wrote like a load of books about like Christ's time in Egypt and all this sort of stuff. So there is...
Y'all can't see this right now, but I'm shooketh. My jaw is on the floor. Queen of Darkness herself, be writing about Jesus Christ. Incredible.
100%. Like, that woman played jump rope with the I'm an atheist, no I'm a Christian, no I'm an atheist, no I'm a Christian. Like, just put us all to shame. It just, as somebody who writes Christian fiction and Christian narrative fiction myself, I kind of feel like I'm in good company with some of this stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway. So, Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan is actually an allegory. It's an allegorical text, and it comes out in 1678. And it's probably one of the most significant works of theological fiction in English literature. And it is like the forerunner of any kind of narrative aspect of Christian media. It's been translated into 200 languages. It's never been out of print. It's had a influence on people like C.S. Lewis, Herman Melville, Charles Dickens, George Bernard Shaw, William Thackeray, Charlotte Bronte, Mark Twain, John Steinbeck, Enid Blyton, and obviously Louisa May Alcott.
That's quite a hall of fame.
I know,
that you just rattled off there.
I know. So there's this one character in it called Apollyon, who is like the main antagonist in Pilgrim's Progress. He's the big bad. And Bunyan didn't pick that name out of nowhere. That name actually comes from a reference in the book of Revelation, like the last book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that one at all?
Yes, yeah, the second coming and horns and bowl. I think there's bowls involved somewhere.
Yeah,
and
bowls, angels, rivers, beasts.
Yeah.
It is crazy. Now, like, one way to look at it is there is a prophetic reveal of things to come in the future. Another way to look at it is that it is the Apostle John talking in coded language to other believers at the time relating to like the destruction of Jerusalem and all that sort of stuff. We have talked more about Revelation in earlier stuff, and I am absolutely not going to get into it again because that will melt your brain.
I think we discussed it for Infinity War, didn't we?
Probably,
if I remember rightly, because obviously everybody gets in.
Let me give you just a taster of Revelation. I'm going to read out a few verses from chapter 9, verses 7 to 11. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had the power to torment people for 5 months. They had as a king over them the angel of the abyss, whose Hebrew name is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon. Brackets, that is destroyer. Okay? So, like, that is some full-on stuff. Do you know what I mean? That is like the Beatles, like, helter-skelter White Album nonsense right there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Just horse-sized locusts to begin with. You could have stopped there and I would have been horrified. But now they have, like, teeth and also, like...
hair with, like, women's hair. So, like, can you imagine, like, they've got these horrendous giant locusts, but with, like, hair like they've just stepped out of the salon, you know?
Oh, God. I love that for them. Like...
For any Torchwood nerds out there, Abaddon is also the big bad in the series 1 of Torchwood. So it's Abaddon and Apollyon
He's also a Warhammer 40k Primarch for my 40k fans out there.
I mean, it's basically when you want to describe somebody who is the big bad, but you can't say the name Satan because it's too obvious, you know? So anyway, they are heavily into reading the Pilgrim's Progress. There's literally chapters of the book where they're reading it to each other and then discussing it, okay? So chapter 8 is called Joe Meets Apollyon. And in the book, each March sister is like depicted as having a fault that she must overcome to get through, usually with like their mother's explicit guidance, you know. And the entire first part of the novel is structured around John Bunyan's moralizing allegory, Pilgrim's Progress. Yeah. So I think for Joe, it's her anger. For Meg, it's her vanity. For Beth, it's her shyness. And for Amy, it's her propensity to burn people's only manuscript, you know.
Yeah, Amy.
Damn it, Amy. Have a word with yourself, you know? So the inspiration for the Bible isn't as direct, but it's like 2 steps removed, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And the aspects that I was talking about with how it kind of mirrors kind of Christian life is, like, one of the scenes in the film, I don't know if you remember, just on Meg's wedding day, and Joe and Meg are in their room together, and Joe drops to her knees and begs her not to get married. Like, we'll run away, you'll be an actress, all right, you know.
Yeah.
She tries to convince Meg to become an actress and save the sisters, and then Meg sort of tells her, just because my dreams are different than yours, it doesn't mean they're unimportant. And this feels like it's the kind of lesson that you need to learn in church life and just feminism in general.
As you were saying, I think it's, if you want to get married and have children and that's your dream, that's absolutely just as valid as I want to be a business tycoon and like sell stocks and get, you know, hella money. You should be allowed to choose.
Yeah.
And that's the crux of the point, you know.
That's what I remember, like a friend of mine explaining to me. It was like, no, feminism isn't we all go out and we all do impressive things and it's like, it's having the choice, you know? Yeah. And some people will often sort of put feminism and Christianity at odds with each other. And for those people, I just politely suggest that they get in the bin, you know, that they get in the bin and stay there, because we don't have time for that nonsense. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's one of those things where particularly people can also see it in, like, not just your job, your vocation that you do, but also the kind of roles you'll do on a Sunday. You know, like if you're up preaching, that's amazing. And if you're leading the worship, that's amazing. And if you're part of the car park team, well, that's fine too, and that's lovely, and that's still important. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so also just the roles that people do as volunteers, people can sort of look at those with differing levels of respect, effectively, you know. Also, Christianity has been one of the last holdouts of a thing called, have you heard of complementarianism?
I sound very uneducated. I have no idea what that is.
Dude, when I hear an incredibly intelligent person not knowing a thing that I know, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, I've got something to contribute to the conversation. So complementarianism was this notion, I'm going to try and say it without my sarcastic voice, that men and women have different callings and have different roles that they fulfill, and that might be fine up until the point where you start to notice that it always seems to be the women's job to make the tea, and it's the men's job to run things and do all the teaching and the rest of it. And I'm sure there are people out there yelling at their speakers right now saying, no, that's not what complementarianism is. And I'm sure there's much more complicated, interesting ways of looking at it, but that is how it often ends up manifesting. And that is one of those things that is so, really does leave itself open to abuse and exploitation quite easily. Being able to see that somebody else's dreams and vocation and the role that they play is just as important as yours is something I feel like lots of people need to get their head around, you know?
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was obviously proposing and getting turned down, okay? Now, you have made your feelings for Laurie perfectly clear, that Laurie is just a truck boy.
Can't be dealing with that.
for the longest time, like, unrequited love was my safe space. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I know where I am with this. I'm going to like you. You're not going to like me back. It's going to be miserable. I'm going to eat lots of ice cream, watch that episode of Buffy where Angel breaks up with her in the sewers. And I'm gonna drive along at night listening to Taylor Swift at obnoxiously loud levels at about 60 miles an hour. That I all knew, you know?
All, perfectly normal things to be doing.
Please tell me you have some experience of that feeling of when you want to be with someone because you seem absolutely perfect for each other, but the other person is just not feeling it.
Yeah, I mean, in my particular experience, I'm thinking of, I thought that would be the case, but actually, I ended up dodging a bullet. So, thank you, that person.
Oh yeah, we've
for
all...
not being interested in me, because it came out a lot better for me in the end. But yeah, no, it's rough, especially because if you kind of get, and I use the word friend zone very tentatively.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the friend zone really exists, because I think you're all, you know, if you were friends to begin with, then you can somewhat still be friends afterward. There's not like a special extra zone.
Yeah.
But you know, when you are friends beforehand and you kind of bare your soul, you then sit there and go, oh no, you know, have I made it awkward, have I made it different, and you know, you don't know whether you should, because you want to kind of continue being friends with that person because you like them and you want to be in their life, but then you're like, oh well, now am I, you know, being weird, and then you end up withdrawing too much, and then you'd be weird because you withdraw. It's a tricky situation. And Buffy episode, Swifty on Max. Ice cream. What else can you do?
All the fun stuff, you know. And obviously in this, Laurie becomes Captain Friendzone, and he does what I think so many of us would do if we had the chance. Is that he goes to Paris, becomes a bit of a lush, and sort of gets drunk and parties with cute girls. And
that is a move. To be fair,
you know, it's like let's not pretend we wouldn't all do that if we had the choice. Do you know what I mean? But I think, obviously, again, talking about Christian subculture, there's this thing of guys proposing to girls, and this is particularly prevalent in America. We have this as well, but this thing of like, God told me I was going to marry you, and it's like, oh, okay, you know. And
I mean,
speaking as somebody who has proposed to somebody, my process was like, you have to pray about it beforehand, because you have to know that you've definitely thought this through and gone through all the processes and the rest of it. So my process tends to be, Lord, I think I want to marry this person. If you think it's a bad idea, tell me no. Okay, all right, let's do that then. You know, but I would in no way interpret that as God told me that I was going to marry you. You know?
Yeah.
So compared to just how badly some people handle the proposing and getting turned down, I think Laurie does a pretty good job of it here.
No, to his credit, he tries to persuade respectfully so, but when Jo puts her foot down, he does respect that. Which actually I do give him points for. Maybe I was a little harsh, but I do. Yeah, I do get. I mean,
we're grading on
points.
A curve, aren't we? Here,
it's
you
the
know,
basic. You know, it's the bare minimum.
Yeah, it is.
Boys, you know, if you get turned down, you can be sad about it. You know, but you gotta respect the decision, my guys.
It's been my experience. Sometimes I've seen where they're like, they want you to be okay with it very quickly. You know, and you're like, no, I need to go over here. I've got my process. You know, it's Buffy season 3, and I before I know what's happening, I'm in the pastries aisle, and you've got to give somebody the space to kind of grieve that thing.
Yeah.
But you've then got to remember that you've got to be okay with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know. I think the flip side to it is that a lot of women, when you're constantly hit over the head with the idea that sort of it's like marriage and kids and family life is the standard, that you feel like that's what you should be aiming for, and as a result there are a lot of internalized pressures on women to say yes, even when the red flags are clearly apparent, you know? Last thing we're going to talk about, and you might want to get your hankies out for this, because we are going to be talking about Beth dying.
Oh.
So there's the obvious parallels in that Beth dies in book 2 in Good Wives. It's because her illness comes back. I can't remember what is it, scarlet fever or
she definitely gets scarlet fever in the film. I don't know if that then recurs later.
And the reason she gets scarlet fever is because she went to the Hummels because she wanted to help them, and she was the only one that would, you know, and she hadn't had scarlet fever as a child, so it became much more dangerous to her. So Beth she's a little bit of a Mary Sue in the sense of she's a bit too perfect, a bit too idealized, but somehow Alcott manages to pull it off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You end up you end up kind of loving her in spite of yourself, I think, you know?
Yeah, I think she's quietly virtuous. Does that make sense? It's not paraded, I think, as how virtuous Beth is. She just gets on with it. Yeah,
100%. So in essence, you see her effectively kind of sacrificing herself to help other people, you know. So the sort of Messiah, the Christ parallels are sort of really apparent in there, you know. And I think one other thing that's really important is that when she does die, it doesn't seem to shake their faith at all. Nobody changes how they feel about God just because their sister and their daughter has died. And I like that, because it shows even in tragedy, God is still God, you know. Those people who lose their faith when they are beset with tragedy, I sometimes think maybe it might have been a bit of a shallower faith to begin with. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's because the entire point of the religion was something terrible happening to somebody innocent. And I just like the way that she manages to come up with like a Christ-like figure in the form of Beth and make it not be cheesy, and that's really impressive, you know.
I mean, Jesus is the main guy, you know. He's the guy that everybody knows, and I think it's trying to do a subtle parallel of Jesus is, as you say, very difficult. When a lot of the time it's, you know, the only I know Jesus. I can probably name you maybe a handful of other biblical figures, but only now having pointed it out, that now I've gone, oh yeah, actually, I suppose when you think about it, Beth and JC, they kind of have that same trajectory.
Yeah, it's the one key thing, you know, somebody who is like, I want to say morally superior, but I know that sounds condescending, but she is, though, you know, she is like morally superior to the others.
Scene in the film, when, you know, Beth's saying, look, I'm going to go to the Hummels, and I think Joe and Amy both kind of go, well, like, we'll go in like, when my mom asks me, hey, can you put the laundry out? Oh, yeah, like, I'll do it in a bit.
Yeah.
Like, I'll do it later. You know, I'll get round to it. Exactly how, you know, teenage me would have probably reacted to doing what I viewed as a chore, which would be go around to the Hummels and give them blankets and food and stuff. So that was, I felt, was quite a realistic sort of, I could see bits of my childhood, you know, in there when, you know, you've got to do this chore that you don't want to do. But Beth will selflessly do that chore. Anyway, despite what it costs her really in the end.
100%. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our Finding the Faith in the Film. I appreciate this might have been a slightly more meandering episode than usual, but...
Sorry, I'm a rambler.
Hey, I'm a rambler too, but I flipping love Little Women. I absolutely adore it, and I couldn't think of anything else that I wanted to talk about for our Christmas episode beyond this one. So, if you have been, thank you so much for listening. We will see you at some point in the new year. Full disclosure, me and Claire have another kid on the way. I do not know what we were thinking. So that might have a knock-on effect on when I can get episodes out, but this isn't the last you've heard from us. In the meantime, Julia, have you had a good time?
I've had a great time. This has been a blast, as always.
Fantastic, me too. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Merry Christmas. Bye.
Bye.
Gordon Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff. That's me. Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Fact-checking and waffle editing by literally no one. I've gone drunk with the lack of oversight. Please rate and review. Unless it's a 1-star, in which case, yeah, you know what, fair enough. We've had a lot going on, so my apologies if this isn't up to our usual sparkling standard. But do me a favour and give us 5 stars anyway, or I'll come round your house and burn the only copy of your manuscript. Merry Christmas, guys, and we'll see you in the new year.